The sun beat down on Xposed's face. He smiled, enjoying the warmth on his skin. It was a rare moment of tranquility, a brief escape from the chaos that had become his life. The golden rays seemed to melt away his worries, if only for a fleeting second. Beside him, his friend Barta laughed, his eyes sparkling with genuine joy. His laughter was infectious, a sound that seemed to harmonize with the gentle crashing of the waves. It was a sound Xposed hadn't heard in what felt like an eternity. They were relaxing on the beach, the gentle waves lapping at their feet. The sand was warm and soft beneath them, a stark contrast to the cold, hard reality they had been facing. The ocean stretched out endlessly before them, a vast expanse of blue that promised freedom and peace. It was a perfect summer day, the kind of day that seemed to exist only in memories or dreams. The sky was a brilliant shade of azure, dotted with fluffy white clouds that drifted lazily by. The air was filled with the scent of salt and sunscreen, a nostalgic reminder of simpler times. Xposed had almost forgotten the danger, the constant fear of being hunted. Almost. For a moment he allowed himself to believe that they were just two friends enjoying a day at the beach. But the shadows of their past loomed large, a dark cloud on the horizon of their perfect day.
You seem happy. More relaxed than usual. Barta's voice was soft, almost wistful, as if he too was clinging to the fragile illusion of normalcy.
Xposed chuckled, picking up a smooth gray stone and tossing it into the surf. The stone skipped once, twice, before sinking beneath the waves. It was a small act, but it felt significant, a way to mark the moment.
Maybe I am. It's nice to have a day off, you know? No more running, no more hiding. Barta's smile was bittersweet, a mix of relief and lingering fear. He knew, as did Xposed, that this peace was temporary.
Barta nodded, his expression turning serious. The weight of their reality settled back in, a heavy burden that neither of them could escape.
Just don't let your guard down. They're still out there. They won't stop until... His voice trailed off, the unspoken words hanging in the air like a dark omen.
Barta trailed off, his gaze drifting towards the bustling boardwalk. The sight of people going about their lives, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows, was both comforting and disheartening. Xposed followed his gaze, a shiver running down his spine. The boardwalk was a stark reminder of the world they were no longer a part of, a world that had moved on without them. He knew Barta was right. The danger was real, and it was never far behind. The brief respite they had found on the beach was just that, a respite, not a solution. He was never truly safe, not anymore. The sense of unease was a constant companion, a reminder that their fight was far from over. But for now, in this moment, they had each other, and that was enough. A shadow fell over them. Xposed looked up, his heart plummeting to his stomach. The air around him seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, a sense of impending doom that he couldn't shake off. A tall, chubby man with a stern face and Cheeto dust between his fingernails stood before them. His presence and size was overwhelming, a force that demanded attention and respect. The officer's gaze was piercing, as if he could see right through Xposed, uncovering every secret he had ever tried to hide. He wore the uniform of the city police department printed with the name Boomer. A few buttons from his uniform were popped off because of his massive size, his badge glinting on his chest. The badge, a symbol of authority and power, seemed to shine even brighter under the harsh light, a constant reminder of the officer's control over the situation. But there was something about his smile, something predatory, that made Xposed's blood run cold. It was a smile that promised trouble, a smile that hinted at the officer's enjoyment of the power he wielded. Xposed couldn't help but feel like a mouse caught in the gaze of a hungry cat.
Xposed money?
The officer loomed over them, a predator sizing up his prey. Xposed's hand instinctively went to the small of his back, towards the hidden weapon he always carried. He could feel the cold metal against his skin, a small comfort in the face of the overwhelming fear that gripped him. He forced himself to relax, to keep his hand visible. He knew that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted, could escalate the situation beyond his control. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "Yes, that's me. What's this about, officer?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge of fear that he couldn't quite hide. He needed to know what he was being accused of, needed to understand the reason for this sudden confrontation. The officer's smile widened, revealing a set of teeth that seemed too sharp, too perfect. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that spoke of malice and ill intent. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine.
Xposed money, you are under arrest for hate crimes and inciting racial violence. The words hit Xposed like a physical blow, leaving him reeling. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could this be happening? He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The officer's grip tightened on his arm, pulling him towards the waiting police car. Xposed's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but all he could feel was a growing sense of panic and helplessness.
Xposed's mind reeled. Hate crimes, racial violence, it was absurd. He'd spent his entire life fighting for justice, for equality. He opened his mouth to protest, but the officer cut him off.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
The officer grabbed Ethan's arm in a vice-like grip, yanking him to his feet, whispering into my ear, "This makes me hard. This is a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong." He looked at Barta, his eyes pleading for him to understand. But Barta was frozen, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. He stared at the officer, then at Xposed, his chubby face pale.
What's going on? Why are you arresting him?
The officer ignored him, shoving Ethan towards a waiting patrol car.
Get in.
His grip tightening on Xposed's arm. "Barta, tell them I would never..." His words were cut off as the officer shoved him roughly into the back of the car. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Xposed watched helplessly as Barta argued with the officer, his voice growing fainter as the patrol car sped away. He slammed his fist against the seat, his mind racing. This had to be a setup, but who would frame him, and why? The interrogation room was cold and sterile, the walls bare except for a flickering fluorescent light overhead. Xposed sat across from a detective, a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a bored expression. The detective had presented his evidence, a series of fabricated social media posts filled with hateful rhetoric and violent threats, all supposedly authored by me, Xposed. "This isn't me, someone is setting me up." The detective leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Detective, the evidence speaks for itself, son. We have you dead to rights." Xposed felt a surge of despair. They were determined to pin this on him. No matter what he said, he was trapped, caught in a web of lies he didn't know how to escape. Days turned into nights, each one blurring into the next. Xposed was thrown into a crowded cell, the air thick with the stench of sweat and despair. He had almost given up hope when a young guard with kind eyes approached his cell. It was Joel Embiid. "Xposed money?" the guard asked quietly, his gaze darting nervously around the cell block. Xposed looked up, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been completely alone, forgotten by the outside world. "Yes," he croaked, his voice raspy from the interrogation. "Don't speak, just listen. I know you're innocent. This is a way out. Take it." Xposed stared at the object in his hand, a small silver key. Hope, fragile and unexpected, flickered in his chest. The key unlocked a service door at the end of the cell block. The guard had explained the escape route in hushed whispers during a brief moment when they were alone. It was risky, bordering on suicidal, but it was Xposed's only chance. He slipped through the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The hallway beyond was dark and deserted, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant. Xposed crept along the wall, his senses on high alert. He could hear the distant shouts of the guards, their large stomachs bounced up and down with every step. They all knew it. The chase was on. Xposed followed Joel's instructions, his mind racing. He had to time this perfectly. He reached a heavy steel door, presumably leading outside. Taking a deep breath, he threw his weight against it, the metal groaning in protest. A wave of cool night air washed over him as he stumbled outside, blinking in the sudden darkness. He was free, but his ordeal was far from over. He could see the flickering lights of police cars in the distance, closing in. He had to disappear, vanish into the night, but where could he go? There was a dense forest at the edge of the city, a place Xposed knew well from his childhood. It was a long shot, but it was his only option. He broke into a run, his lungs burning, his legs screaming for him to stop. The sound of sirens grew louder, closer. They were gaining on him. He pushed himself harder using the skills Diddy taught him, ignoring the pain, his eyes fixed on the dark outline of the forest ahead. He could hear dogs barking now, their deep, guttural howls sending chills down his spine. They were using tracking dogs. He had to reach the woods. He had to disappear. He burst through the tree line, the darkness swallowing him whole. He could hear the dogs barking excitedly, their heavy panting close behind. He had to lose them. He had to confront the man who had framed him. He circled back, deeper into the woods, until he reached a clearing. And there, standing in the moonlight, was the corrupt officer, a smug smile on his face.
"You're a hard man to catch, Xposed."
The officer sneered, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Why set me up? Why?" Xposed spat, his voice raw with anger and exhaustion. The officer chuckled, a cold, humorless sound.
"Let's just say it's your people I vow to take down,"
he replied, his eyes gleaming with malice. Officer Boomer drew his gun, the metal glinting in the moonlight. The tension in the air was palpable. the silence of the forest amplifying the sound of the gun being drawn. The moonlight cast eerie shadows, making the scene even more surreal. Xposed reacted instinctively, years of training kicking in. His mind raced, calculating his next move in a split second. He knew that hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. He lunged forward, his hand shooting out to deflect Boomer's arm just as the gun fired. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, a stark contrast to the quiet of the forest. Xposed's movements were fluid, a testament to his rigorous training and unyielding determination. The shot went wild, echoing through the silent forest. Birds scattered from the trees, startled by the sudden noise. The forest, which had been a silent observer, now seemed to come alive with the echoes of the gunshot. Xposed disarmed the Boomer in one swift movement, the gun clattering uselessly to the ground. The sound of the gun hitting the forest floor was almost anticlimactic, a stark contrast to the intensity of the struggle. He fought back, fueled by adrenaline and righteous fury. Every punch, every kick was delivered with precision and purpose. The forest seemed to hold its breath, watching the intense melee unfold. In the end, it was over quickly. The officer was no match for Xposed's skill and determination. The fight, though brief, had felt like an eternity. Officer Boomer lay groaning on the ground, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Pain etched across his face. He looked up at Ethan with a mix of fear and exhaustion. Xposed stood over him, his chest heaving, his entire body trembling with exhaustion. He had escaped. The weight of what had just transpired began to sink in, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had cleared his name. The sense of relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just one battle in a much larger war. But the fight was far from over. Xposed knew that his journey was just beginning. The determination in his eyes was unmistakable. He knew they would come for him again. The forest, once a place of solace, now felt like a battleground. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig could signal the approach of another threat, and he would be ready. With a deep breath, Ethan steeled himself for what was to come. The fight for justice was far from over, but he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead.